for generously sharing their time and insight with us today. To introduce our panelist and moderator, I would invite our faculty mentor, Professor Saradnath Bhattacharya. Sir, you can take over. Thank you.
Thanks, Sahil. Now it's my pleasure to introduce the panel to take the discussions forward. Before I begin, let me give you a brief about our institute. We started in 2007 and the first 2-year PGP program started in 2008. So we are now 16-year-old program. This is a 16-year-old program running and we are a 16-year-old institute. Currently, we run around 5 programs. So we have got residential 2-year MBA, residential 1-year MBA, exclusively for executives. So normally people with 7 to 8 years of experience are welcome there. We also have a residential PhD. So 3 residential programs. Along with that, we have 2 non-residential program also. One is an executive PhD, which is designed for those who have spent more than 10 years. Sorry, somebody is.
All the participants, you are requested to be stay on mute.
So 2 non-residential programs. We have an industrial track PhD, which is designed for those who have spent at least 10 years in the industry and now wants to revisit the academic curriculum once and contribute to the knowledge creation. And along with that, we have one weekend MBA program, which is delivered online with specific modules done in the campus. So in total, we run 5 programs. Each of the program has got something is common, and that something is the holistic development of the students. And each student here gets a chance to engage, get involved with what or she likes towards his or her passion. And the program that we are seeing this today is exclusively done, organized by the Niveshak team, which is the finance club here. For today, but the budget discussion we have among us, to begin with, let me welcome CA Ranjit Kumar Agarwal, the president of ICAI. Mr. Agarwal is the 72nd president of the ICAI, and this is for the term 24-25. He is vastly experienced, more than 2 decades of experience, and he currently holds the position of the technical advisor to ICAI's representation on the IFAC board. He's a board member of SAFA as well. He has served 3 consecutive terms on the CAI Central Council as well. So vastly experienced panelists. Number 2, we have Ms. Anubhuti Sahai, who is the head of South Asia Economics Research India at Standard Chartered. She earned the title of the Best Forecaster for India by Bloomberg in 2013. In 2019, the Asset Benchmark Research recognized her as the top research professional in India. She has also previously worked with SEBI and Morgan Stanley. Welcome, madam. Next, we have Mr. Shubhodip Rakshit, the Chief Economist at Kotak Institutional Equities. He is heading the Economics Research Division since 2010, and before joining Kotak, he was part of the Economics Research teams at Morgan Stanley and UBS, focusing on UK, rest of the Europe, Middle Eastern economies. Welcome, sir. Next, we have Dr. Sachidanand Shukla, Group Chief Economist at L&T. So Dr. Shukla focuses on macroeconomic trends, global markets, geopolitical risks, something which is the trend now. And I'm sure that we are going to hear a lot of latest trends depending on how the time permits and the moderator permits. With 24 years in financial economics, he previously headed economic research at Mahindra Group, senior VP and economist at Axis Capital as well. So for the 4 panelists, we have the moderator for the day, Mr. Amol, who is the editor at ET-BFSI and ET-CFO. He has around 1.5 decades of experience in finance journalism, covering the BFSI sector, fintech, insurtech, and so on. He was formerly the editor of Fin Business. He worked with Zee Business, CNBC TV18 as special correspondents and producer as well. Welcome, Amolji, and the floor is yours. Welcome you all.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's great to meet Anubhuti. So thank you so much. I am Hong and Niveshak, and I so as the for the economic
Amol sir, we are not able to hear you.
Not audible.
acting. Good afternoon. Am I audible now?
Yeah.
Thank you. I think there was some issue. Hope the god of network is favor. We begin. Thank you so much. I am in Shillong and team of I am Shillong. Um, Economic Times largest media in the country has a lot of digital news portals now because digital heading the banking and tell the students here that anybody who was looking for it or maybe interested in doing any projects on I have been doing
Yeah, maybe you can switch off your video, Amol, if maybe then we can hear you clearly.
yeah, that. I hope this is better.
Little broken, but we'll try. Let's see.
Okay, let's hope that maybe the audio will clear as I had only asked questions and maybe listens to you. Uh, so uh, so I was trying to connect with the students and trying to understand what is it that they are looking from all of you, because otherwise I could go on a macro and microeconomy and perhaps the larger aspects. But it's very important for the students to understand what is your perspective and how's actually the budget translating it specifically for them. So let me begin by asking the first question to you, Mr. Agrawal. You being the CA and specifically heading one of the largest institute which is dealing with the CA, uh, what is the difference that you see between the new scheme and the old scheme that the students wants to understand? Which one is more beneficial? Because a lot of things will depend on the earning of the person. Ultimately, what is the aim of the government behind creating a new scheme or a old scheme?
Thank you very much. Hope I am audible.
Yes.
Thank you very much to all of you for giving this chance to interact with the young students of I am Shillong. I know Mr. Bajoria and he's the director there from Calcutta. So he also called me to be there. Anubhati Sahai, Subhadeep, Dr. Sukla, and Amol and all the students, thank you very much. As far as this budget is concerned, this is the 11th budget of this government and 7th budget by this current finance minister, Madam Nirmala Sitharaman. And most of the budget, if you see the last 11 budget of this government, there is no disconnect from one budget to another. All these budgets are connected for a larger goal and for a larger vision. On that line, baby steps they are taking. But at the same time, the whole objective of this entire budget making exercise to make the income tax law simpler. And that's why she had announced that within 6 months they are coming out of the new income tax act, which was 1961. And it has been not been so much of amendment took place so many years, but the entire simplification of the taxation provision they are bringing, and the ICA is working closely with the CBDT in that aspect. But as far as this budget, you are asking about the old regime and new regime. In the old regime, lots of deductions, exemptions are there, and because of this rate of taxation, exemptions, deductions, things are getting complex and complex. And if you see, there are in the business and profession, there are only 28 to 44. There are only this section. Within this section, they have to include whatever amendment they want to bring, because there is a type section boundary within which they have to make the amendment. But now why they are shifting to new regime? They want to have the more and more lower taxation, like I can say the limit, and by going away and phasing out various reduction and exemptions they are giving. And as they have mentioned in the budget, 58% of the corporates has gone to the new regime, and two-thirds of the non-corporates are gone for the new regime. So the whole objective of the government from new regime to old to new regime is that how the entire taxation system may be simpler. A common man can understand the tax, and they don't want to go to a expert or a chartered accountant as a small taxpayer, as an individual, so that they can file their return. More so, the government objective is the taxation collection. If the government or the country has to be a developed country in 2047, right now the per capita income in India is $2,550 per person. Now, if you have to be a developed country, it has to be 5 times. 12,500 per capita income is the assessment made by various reports. Now, if you see the 10 years before this government started the first budget, the total direct tax collection, 62% was coming from corporates and 38% was coming from non-corporates. After 10 years, before this interim budget, 2023, if you see the direct tax collection, there are 16 lakh crore. Now, this 16 lakh crore, 50% came from corporates and 50% from non-corporates. So there's a huge jump from 38% to 50% as far as non-corporates is concerned. So the whole objective is the country can develop if the individual citizen of this country are empowered and they will start paying the tax. So once they will start paying the tax collection will enhance and the country can on the path of the development. So the whole objective of this old and new regime is entire system should be simplified, less rebate, less deduction, simpler slab rate should be there so that common man can understand and they can participate and pay the tax more whenever they are getting the income. And that is the whole objective of digitalization and GST also in that line. The common man can understand the tax and they can pay tax. So this is the major objective of old regime and new regime.
Noted your point, sir, and I think simplicity is agenda that we can see. And the other tax part that you mentioned, nobody expected the GST will go, breaking every month. We had cost 200,000 very recently. I will come to you specifically on whether it is really beneficial for the people at large and what the students perhaps would like to know. Let me move to Anubhuti and let me from you. Government has chosen a fiscal prudent for sure. They want to control the fiscal deficit. But again, majority of money also came from the bank, with the tax points is also good. How do you see the government strategy, whether it is in line with the current economy, which is 7 to 7.5% that we are expecting, and is this budget taking India forward when we are talking about? Do you see that roadmap?
Yeah, thanks, Amol. And just to confirm, the question is the fiscal prudence which this budget has demonstrated in line with the state of the economy today and how we see it going forward, right? Is that the question? Yeah, sure. So I would, if you look at this particular government, ever since 2014, fiscal prudence clearly has taken a priority. There was a brief break during the COVID period where obviously certain expenditure needs had to be met, but this government has always prioritized fiscal prudence because it's extremely important if we are looking at the overall macroeconomic stability. We have to remember that India is a twin deficit running economy, vulnerable to high inflation and vulnerable to high global commodity prices. And to that extent, the policymakers will have to do whatever they can to boost the macroeconomic stability, or so take measures which are in their control to boost macroeconomic stability. And fiscal prudence is extremely important in that aspect. Now, is it in cognizance with where the economy stands today? I would, I would say so because at this point in time, India is growing at 8%. I mean, last year in fiscal year 24, India grew at 8%, and to that extent, a significant loosening in in fiscal deficit was not justified. So, and even if we look at the quality of fiscal deficit, the government has clearly prioritized capex because it boosts the medium-term prospects. So one is fiscal prudence, which helps the macroeconomic stability story. Secondly, focus on public capex, which is extremely important if we have to think about the medium-term story. That strategy has always been ranked higher than passing on freebies to the to the public at large. This government is extremely conscious on that front. So it is in line with the state of economy, I would say. Yes, there is a little bit of a disappointment to some extent because rural demand has been weak. There were also some expectations that probably the middle class might get some relief from lower tax rates. That didn't come through. But I would, I wouldn't take that as a big negative. It's a little bit of a disappointment because the focus, as I mentioned, remains on capex. And one good part about this particular budget was increased allocation towards skilling and education. Any government runs with very limited resources, and there are competing claims on those resources. One option for the government was to just go and give those tax cuts or increase transfer of purchasing power to rural India. Now, these are permanent losses in revenue. Don't think about it from perspective of 12 months. It's a permanent loss in income for the government. So they could have gone that way. Or the other alternative is don't give those benefits to the consumer at large, but use that for creating skilling and employment. Because at the end of the day, as the common saying is, every day you can't give a fish to a person, but if you learn that man how to fish, that will help him over a longer period of time. So I think this whole focus on employment generation is extremely encouraging. The allocation is small at this point in time, but I think the much needed step towards employment generation has been taken in this particular budget.
I think let us quite meaningful anubhuti. In fact, middle class has own issues and there's we'll try to discuss also if we get an opportunity little later. But let's come to Swadip and we learn an economist perspective from Anubhuti. I know you are also wearing the same hat, but you want to focus more on the FII and FDI. If you look at the India currently, everybody is betting really high. In fact, India is an integral part of the global economy now. Everybody wants to enter in India. But when you look at investments, FII investments are obviously very strong. They're putting 10 to 15,000 crore every day and taking it out also. But what is lacking is the FDI. The foreign direct investments are still not coming to the level which we wanted, despite the PLI schemes and many decisions that we have taken. So my question to you, Subodhi, on this ground is this budget allowing foreign companies to open the shops in India aggressively? Do you see foreign companies going to come to India? Because if the investments will come, perhaps the job issue will be resolved automatically.
Interesting question, because I think these kind of measures that come through in the budget, these are not just one shot measures that we should be looking at. Things like FII investment, FDI investments are through the year or running into multi-year agenda. So I don't think we should look at it from a small lens of the budget. But having said that, if you look at the budget, there are some important points to note. One is, as Anubhuti talked about, is the employment part, right? That there are some employment linked incentives that are being given, more for the the domestic companies, not as much for it won't immediately impact the foreign companies, but also the skilling part is important because a lot of the companies would be talking about not having the right skilled labor in some sense, right? And that skilled labor is something that you cannot build in a year or so, right? It's a multi-year program that you have to run. To that extent, the first step is taken. Second, when you're thinking of it from a perspective of whether FDI is coming in or FII is coming in or whether they're interested or not. It also depends on the macro environment, right? It's not just labor, there's also land. Part of it is dealt with in the budget, where they are talking about land registry, they're talking about digitization of land parcels, whether it is rural, urban. Also, part of the loan that are given to states in the form of the capex loans to states that are given will have certain conditionality, which is linked to the kind of reforms they do, let's say on industrial parks, etc. Right. So these kind of conditionalities help on the land part of things. The next comes is the ease of doing business, right? And this, I don't think the budget can readily solve it. But sorry, am I audible? Okay, so that does not necessarily come from the budget, but it's also to do with a lot of the things that the government keeps doing through the year, whether it is easing of legal compliance or whether it is in terms of setting up, whether it is in the form of IBC, how much of the IBC process is being smoothened. All of these matter, right? So these so-called factors of production, ease of doing business have to be taken care of. Not necessarily part of the budget, but the budget has made quite a head start in that in that context. The last part that I would want to talk about is in terms of the FDI numbers that we see. And historically, we haven't seen FDI in manufacturing as such. FDI is mostly in the services sector that we see. Now that the shift is starting to happen, that the thrust is in the manufacturing sector, hopefully we'll see it. But there's one part that we have to contend with, is that in the current, let's say the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of the PE and the VCs, kind of step away from the companies, whereas FIIs or the domestic guys are taking up that space. So to that extent, you'll see FDI numbers which are depressed. Hopefully they pick up, but I mean, I don't think it's a one-shot formula that you can have that we do this and FDI will start coming in manufacturing. So I think it's a multi-year process that we have to go on with.
Noted your points, very realistic. So the I think ease of doing business and clear taxation, clarity from the government will matter the most, for sure. Sachidanandji, let me come to you. Being one of the biggest, largest manufacturer, again, you're wearing economist hats. My question to you is specifically about China. The government didn't speak much about China in the budget, but just the previous day itself, in the economic survey, the CA has made a very bold comment, says that India should look at FDI from China very aggressively. What does it mean to you? How will it translate into Indian economy? Do you think such FDI, will boost and will also develop the relations with China and, India? Why I want to ask you this question is because till now we were talking actually about taking China plus benefit and Atmanirbhar Bharat. So are we taking a U-turn or just we are forming a different strategy? Though the government has not, said anything in this budget about this. So what are your overall views on China plus strategy and how should India look at, China FDI?
So thank you, Amol. Just good afternoon to my fellow panelists and all the people from IIM Shillong. Thank you. Glad to be here. I think I just wanted to start with some caveats, okay? Because you asked me about something which is also futuristic. I just want to tell everyone present here that very often economists miss forecasts like Columbus missed India, right? When he set out to discover India. And this is, Anubhuti, please pardon me for saying this. You've been regarded as one of the best forecasters for multiple years. But this is more of a caveat for me. Amol, to your question on China, I think the whole world is grappling, or let me put it this way, the whole world has been grappling with this problem for several years now, right? It was only after President Donald Trump, when he came to power, 2017 onwards, we saw this very visible global trade push against China. And that was initially deemed to be an outlier in terms of global policy. Now it has become mainstream, right? When you look at the global economic backdrop, it is the so-called or the erstwhile champions of global free trade, which is the United States, the Europeans. Everybody's made an about turn, and they're all championing muscular industrial policy. And a lot of it is in the name of trying to move away from China, lower the dependencies. So we've had this problem during the COVID when it became alarming, and a lot of policymakers really struggled to get it right. You know how everybody was running to manufacture PPEs and masks, and we discovered that even for small tiny things, we were also dependent on China. So I think this is not something new, and the world has now for some time been trying to veer towards self-sufficiency in some things, or at least move away from China. So the single source of dependency is what everybody is struggling with, and therefore the whole China plus one thing has come about. But this, I think, is going to be.
ऐप डाउनलोड हुआ होगा ना
Sorry, somebody's
I
needs to
think
put the
someone has
mic
not
on mute.
muted its audio. Yeah. Request all the students to please keep unmute yourself. Unmute yourself.
So I think it is going to be a journey. It cannot be a single sort of a single year or a single policy thing wherein everybody can take a break from China and move away. As we look to the future, we talk about renewables, we talk about EVs, and we know how China controls the processing of a lot of these things for the future when it comes to industry, when it comes to manufacturing. And therefore, I think what the chief economic advisor has said does make a lot of economic sense, because in any case, everything that we consume as individual consumers, corporates, or even governments, a lot of the components, a lot of the imports do come from China. This is true not just for India, but also for the US, for Europe at large, and the world at large. So I think this is going to be a multi-year journey, and it is for the economic policymakers, the governments of the day, to really decide how much and how fast to move away. I think this should be done with a view so as to not compromise the economic efficiencies and the cost that consumers will have to pay eventually for this about turn or moving away from China.
Oh, that's a very interesting answer, Siddhanand. I think good one. Thanks for adding that. I would also like to make a small announcement here that the students can shoot their questions, either raise your hand or send your message in the chat. So I will take your questions. In my next round of questions, I will start with Mr. Agarwal again and take his view on the STD and capital gains. And after that, I will specifically focus on employment, internship, and reskilling kinds of issues. I will also ask the panelists if what kinds of openings they have, maybe perhaps interesting for you students. But so please be ready with your questions. So Mr. Agarwal, I copied you. I heard you. The government wants to make it very, very simple. Move to new regime because you don't need to have attached a lot of documents in the old, which the old regime was adopting. But indexation, a lot of issues are there. Even the opposition party is making a lot of noise. Every person, actually friend out of media is calling me and asking me, boss, ये क्या हो रहा है? मेरा जो दादाजी का घर मेरे पास था, क्या मुझे उस पर ज्यादा टैक्स देना पड़ेगा? That is a middle class question. Second is STT, capital gain पे सब लोग परेशान हैं. So on one side, the government is trying to make it very, very simple, but on the other side, they're trying to levy more taxes, which perhaps we as a country are still not ready. If you make a rough calculation, sir, I as a citizen or a middle class person, earn 100 rupees and pay almost 35 to 40 rupees as a tax. So do you think for the economy like us, which is still earning $2,000 per capita, is it okay with us? I mean, is it okay with such taxation? So I put 2-3 things together: indexation, STT, capital gains, and overall taxation, sir.
You see, as a finance minister, there is a lot of challenge to the finance minister. On one hand, they have to maintain the fiscal deficit below 5%. At the same time, they have to give the freebies to the common people of this country. Now, unfortunately, India is the only country where 80 crore people are being given free ration every day for next 5 years. So these are the challenge for freebie, the compulsion of the coalition. The state has to be given money, but at the same time to keeping fiscal deficit, somewhere they have to get the money. From where they will get the money? So to have this, now you might be aware, Indian stock market is the fourth largest in the world now. And the kind of return we are getting compared to US and China, now our returns are more than that. And having said that, you have seen the SEBI press release 2 days before. One more thing they have said, the challenge in the stock market is also very disturbing. The total intraday loss, if there is a 40% are accountable by the young population below the age of 30. So what they are trying to do, key market is growing. The insurance sector in 2015, we have allowed insurance company can also invest in the equity market. Then the savings of the people have already going to the mutual fund and market. Now they are not going to the FD, which the RBI is worried. If the people are not investing in the fixed deposit, they are going for equity market. So that way market is growing. But somewhere they have to tax them. That's why they are saying, yes, STT and the FNO, they have made some changes. But at the same time, they want to have a long-term capital gain, a rationalized. 20% become 12.5% without indexation. With indexation, it was 10%. So now they are saying, yes, 20% will come, 7.5% I'm giving you rebate. But the old property, I will give you the only valuation of 2001. 2001 valuation I will give you, and then you have to pay 12.5%. But in this scenario, those who are holding the property for the longer holding period, they have the disadvantage. For the shorter holding period, they have the advantage. So that everybody cannot be made happy. That is the challenge with the finance minister. But at the same time, they have to collect the tax, and that is the reason they have made this adjustment. But yes, you are right. Various quarter, the UN crisis coming, the black money will come, people will not show the main income, people will not show the main value, which is the intent of this government. See, the digitalization should be there so that the transparency should come and people should show more to pay the tax. But yes, this indexation going away at the time of 2001, with the current market value of 2001, no indexation. So the longer holding period will have a disadvantage and the shorter holding period advantage. But the government says we want to rationalize. So this question you are asking, it's pros and cons both. How much they will garner the revenue from this, but the STT and the STT or the FNO trade, because huge number of FNO trade going on in the market, youngsters are doing huge number of FNO trade, so that's what they have put some extra charges so to get the money. So, but let me tell you, the market had absorbed this. The day it was announced, the market has gone down 1200 points, but in the end, it has closed the flat. Now, two successive trading sessions, they are saying not so negative, positive. But since huge money in the market, now Indian market has become going to be mature. They are not fully dependent on the F2, FII. They are now on the domestic investment, huge money. So that's why they have thought the market will continue. We have to tax them. That was the objective of this long-term, short-term, and FNO charges they have increased in the stock market.
A very relevant and a realistic answer, Mr. Agrawal. And yes, I quite agree that finance minister can't make everyone happy. But on FNO part, I hope when you say youngsters are, doing lots of, FNO, I hope the students of IIM and Shillong are not investing a lot of time specifically on FNO, but perhaps the long-term investment. Noted your points. Now, let me just focus specifically on the employment reskilling and what kinds of opportunities or which opportunities are there. And students, please shoot your questions in a chat window or something like that. Let me move ahead on employment part only. And Anubhav, I will come to you again. India is a very, very different country. While we talk only about macro and micro, two data points which always intrigues me is one, every third second we order one biryani on Swiggy. And second, India has 1 million Uber experts, right? So there is enough growth also happening on the side. But unemployment ratio is also very high. I mean, in last 6 years, has improved slightly. My question to you is, the government has done a lot of employment by giving 5,000 rupees of stipend to the students. The first month's salary will be given by the government specifically is a joint venture company to the institute registered in EPFO. Do you think that these initiatives of government will actually entice India and also maybe generate employment in the country?
So Amol, the issue is here that when we're talking about creating enough number of jobs, we have to think about the size of the problem. The size of the problem is very large. If we go by economic survey, it has stated that India needs to create 8 million jobs in the non-farm sector every year. Creating 8 million jobs is a very, very big number. Based on some, based on recent RBI data, etc., India has been creating more jobs than what is the required number. If you go by the latest RBI claims data, India created on an average 13 million jobs in the non-farm sector over the past 5 years. So if we just compare these two figures, there seems to be no problem. There is enough employment opportunities available, and employment is not an issue. The problem here is about the quality of jobs which are being created here. If you look at the stock of the jobs which are available in the economy today, 45% of the total jobs or the 45% of total labor force in India are employed in the agricultural sector. The productivity is almost one third or slightly less than that vis-a-vis the rest of the economy. There are the next 30% is in the services sector where the productivity varies. So there can be very highly productive sectors, for instance, if someone is employed in the software sectors, but in case if you are employed in the lower, at the lower end, so for instance, like delivery services, etc., then the productivity is much lower. And then in between you have, like an almost an equal share between industry and the construction. And depending on the state of the cycle, either construction is higher or the industry is lower. So if you were, there are, as I mentioned, there are twofold problems. One is the size of the problem. It's very large, and it looks much daunting because it's not only about creating the right number of jobs, it's about creating the right kind of jobs. Because the median age in India is 28 years. That says we have a lot of young people and a lot of potential which needs to be harnessed if we have to become a developed economy by 2047. Now, can one single budget address a problem which is as enormous as this? Absolutely not. This has to be, this will have to be an ongoing process. What I like about this budget is, we as an economist, we have always highlighted that concrete steps have not been taken till now. And I think this budget really changes the narrative. The government has set aside around $25 billion to be spent over 5 years. A lot of it is in the form of incentives, but around there is a certain proportion which the government is also putting in industrial training institutes, ITIs, because unless the vocational training picks up in India, the skilling levels will not go up. If you compare India's vocational training level, only 4 to 5% of India's labor force has a formal vocational training. If you look at other economies, Germany's or the many Southeast Asian economies, that number would be northwards of 50 or 60%. So at least that first step has been taken. Will this first step address everything? No, I think, even if you look at the budget proposal, that the government will provide incentives and they plan, I think the number is 1 million interns to be trained by the top 500 companies. It effectively is telling you that every company on an annual basis has to train 4,000 interns. That's an impossible number. You really can't work around with, such tall targets. So at least that step has been taken. Whatever the government has put in the form of incentives, it will not be successful in the first go. But that process has started. There will be a feedback loop. It will work, and hopefully, over a period of time, we will have a much more robust structure to address the employment issue. And the last point which I would like to mention is that when we are talking about the employment issue, we have to think from both perspectives. One is the quality of labor supply, Because if you look at, almost 50% of graduates in India are considered unemployable. If you look at the basic education level, a 10th standard student might not be able to do a simple division, etc. So one is the quality of labor. And the second is one also has to work towards creating the right kind of job. So unless these two sides of equation match, the problem of jobs will not get solved. And I think it was mentioned by one of my panelists earlier, these problems get solved over generations. But at least the first step has been taken, and I hope that going forward, more and more discussions and interactions between the private and the public sector will try to find a solution or towards this employment problem in India.
Absolutely, Nubhuti. In fact, I absolutely agree with you. But let me bring Sudeep here and take the same questions forward. So, Sudeep, while it sounds really good that the government has heard the concern of the people at large, which is employment and jobs, and they try to do something, but if you look at the fine prints, when you look at the execution, actually nothing much has been done on the jobs side. Uh, like Anubhuti said, every company has to train 4,000 people, which means that if you look at 1 crore people, 500 companies will have to train 20,000 people in the next 5 years, which likely looks impossible. And though they have to spend their money specifically through the CSR fund to manage trainings, logistics operations will be a nightmare because a lot of companies, don't have that size of even onboarding 4,000, 5,000 people to train them. So do you really think that, this move will work perhaps in terms of generating employment? Do you really think that the corporate India will look at this move very aggressively? Because one more point here is the government has not made this mandatory. It's absolutely optional. The finance minister has clearly said that we are nudging the corporate India, which means that whether even HDFC or TCS wants to have these people, it's their choice. It's not compulsory or mandatory. So do you think this will really work, Suodhi?
Yeah, I mean, so look, this nudge thing is always a very central point of the behavioral economics and has been, I think, a cornerstone for budgets. I think the last 3, 4 budgets would be operating a lot on the nudge. In fact, I put the nudge thing on the new tax regime versus old tax regime also, because what you're trying to do is, kind of let people make the choice, right? So in that sense, also, I think the government always views the jobs problem as a private sector problem. It can't be solved by the government per se, right? The government can be the enabler. And hence, when they talk about employment-linked incentive, it clearly says that, I'm giving you an incentive. Now the corporates have to figure it out. For example, Sachi might have a great perspective on whether L&T can or would want to take in excess of 5,000 people, right? But it's not as if all the top 500 companies can take it, right? For example, the skill set may not be suitable for certain companies, and they might not find that many number of people uh, in that particular year that they may want to take. And not everything works on a profit or a cost basis, right? There's also some business parameters that could be attached that I'm in a down cycle. It's not as if every year is a fantastic year. If there is a down cycle, I will not be able to take them. So to that extent, it's an incentive that has been given. It's a nudge, as you rightly said, it's been given. We don't know. Very honestly, I don't know if I can pinpoint saying that, this will definitely work. But having said that, we've seen production-linked incentive work to a certain extent. Hopefully, the employment-linked incentive, if not 100%, the targets are met, at least 50% being met. And that in itself, so the government has roughly 40 million odd jobs to be created over the next 5-6 years under this particular incentive linked scheme, including the skilling as well as the labor employment part. Maybe do 20 million, but that's a start, right? So I think that is where we start. And then we see how the other enabling factors, which we all discussed earlier, that around the ecosystem of production, manufacturing, services, that ecosystem, how it works, right? And then you will have, so if companies grow, they will hire labor in some sense. Of course, there are other structural issues that, what will AI do and what will automation do and all those kind of things. But broadly, you have to grow as a country, you have to grow as a company. and you have to do more value-added services or value-added manufacturing, right? Which gets you that profitability, which lets you absorb more employment, right? So that I think is the fundamental way to go forward. This is just a nudge.
Sure. Sachidanandji, I will take the same question to you as well, whether this will work, because I'm sure your perspective will be slightly different and that will matter to us the most because of your background or the company that you represent. But also, whether this particular scheme will work or not, I want you to know, but I want you to tell us. But also, you add to it, uh, being one of the biggest manufacturer, what is the major problem that you see with the generation and the requirement of the corporate India? Why is there such a big mismatch of the skills? Because even the CEA has mentioned that few percentage of the generation is unemployable, which is educated one, but still it's unemployable. Why? I mean, if you could add on that part also, will be really important for us to maybe learn something on that part.
So thank you, Rahul. I think when you look at the jobs problem, just first let's understand the scale. We need to generate roughly about 18 jobs every second, right? This is again from the economic survey number, right? You need about 8 million jobs every year, and that translates to roughly 18 jobs every single second. In a country that is as large and as diverse, and please remember that we also have sub-sovereigns or state governments. So we are a union, right? And like Shubhadeep made the point, essentially it is the private sector that creates jobs on a sustainable basis, right? Governments cannot, I mean, they can't do it on a sustainable basis. Yes, during certain times like a war or the pandemic, they can step in and try and create jobs. But essentially, their job is to be an enabler. And therefore, sustainable job creation over a period of time happens from entrepreneurs, from companies, and they are the only large sources of job creation, whether it is informal or formal. And that's a proven thing. There is a lot of empirical evidence globally. Now, creating jobs and skilling, I think what we have is not just a jobs challenge. So I just spoke about the scale of the challenge. Also, we've struggled despite being a labor surplus economy. Any person you talk to, any large employer or a small employer, whether it is an MSME or a large company, you'd hear that, oh, we can't really find people with the requisite skills or the necessary experience. And this has also been a major problem. So while you've had a jobs challenge, you also had a wages challenge. I think Anubhuti mentioned or alluded to this. So at times there are jobs, but people don't really find the wage rate or the wage level really attractive enough. And the third is there is a big skew in the Indian economy, which is the formal versus informal. And lately, I think more than now 12 to 14 years, we've seen the government really try and formalize. And we, by definition, have been a large informal economy. And there is a serious challenge in terms of getting the informal into the formal. For example, any economy that has done well, they have brought in people from agriculture to manufacturing and then into services. And it's now very well documented how India has leapfrogged from agriculture to services. And now we are trying to do a lot more manufacturing and labor intensive manufacturing just to provide that step up in jobs. We'll have to do this for multiple decades. It is not something that a budget can address in one single year or maybe a couple of years. And this right now, as we speak, is the holy grail. I mean, look at Europe, look at the US. Post global financial crisis, this is the single most important issue, which is bringing to fore these divisions in the European society, the American society, and is manifesting in political changes that we see. The whole rise of Trump and the whole rise of extreme right and left in Europe is a result of the inability of policymakers to generate enough jobs of a certain quality. So jobs of a certain quality and the right wage, all of these are a big problem. We as a company, our chairman is on record that we are really struggling to get enough number of people. This year, for example, we will struggle with not getting about, say, 45 or 1,000 people. And those, so you can try giving them higher wages and doing whatever you can as a corporate. But the problem is you don't either have the number of people in terms of the availability in a certain geography or the required skill sets. To be fair to the government, I think it is beginning to put money where its mouth is, right? So this budget, there is a 1.8 lakh crore allocation for this scheme. So this is something that they've say well begun, and they have the heart in the right place. They're trying to do the right thing. So not only create jobs, also formalization. So that 3,000 rupees for the EPFO contribution and things like that. So there are multiple layers. I mean, the scheme ABC, and then they're beginning to do this right. But again, multiple things have to fall in place for these jobs. I mean, 21 jobs every second. The central government, the state governments, ease of doing business, and the government has to probably move out of a lot of areas, and only then. Plus, there are other global challenges. For example, if somebody is an exporter, just because the government is giving you X number of rupees for hiring certain number of people, you will probably not do that, right? Or maybe even if you want to do that, you may not really find them having the right skills. So this is a multiple year journey. And this, to me, is a medium-term step that they have taken. Let's not be very hasty in judging the government. It cannot happen in 4 quarters or 2 years and all of that. This is more like a 5-year strategy. Hopefully, things should work out. We should be able to create some jobs. We should be able to get some more people skilled, and also get in some more, say, formalization in the job space. So let's be probably a bit patient, and hopefully the execution will be far better, because these things, as you know, any policy step, the intent is always good, is always right, but the way you execute it is all that really matters.
Very realistic one, Sachidanandji. Thank you so much for adding that. I absolutely copy you. Very relevant thoughts, and thank you, in fact, for sharing that number. I remember your chairman has, went on public and said how difficult it is to hiring people, specifically in the manufacturing companies. Noted your points. There are a couple of questions, I think one or two, which I already took in my discussion earlier. But someone called Lavish wants to know, will the increase in LTCG and STCG tax rates discourage the new investors in the equity market? We already know that not even 10% of the population invests in equities. I think the students are investing maybe in a market. So, Mr. Agarwal, I want you to take this question.
Yes, as I told you, this is the intent of the government. More and more people are coming to the market, so they want to capitalize the growth in the capital market by enhancing this tax. STCD has become 20% now, and as I told you, this is the region. Youngsters are huge numbers are coming in the stock market. And there are two regions. As in the previous discussion, you are having the skill set. Now, unfortunately, in our country, we are a largest and youngest population of the world. But somehow, because of the coaching institution and other, unfortunately, skill set is not coming. Degrees are coming, papers are coming, everything is there.
Mr. Agarwal, I think you kept muted yourself by mistake, I guess.
Okay. So
Yes.
I'm just giving you one data. There is a site, FPSB India. They are saying India are short of 18 lakh finance job. India is short of 18 lakh finance job. They are not getting finance professional to fill up the job. Its population is increasing, young population is there, but if the skills are not there, how to meet out this requirement? That is the biggest challenge to the everybody, including government, all of us as an educational institution, how we are making our youngster to know the skill set required for respective field. So as far as this capital market is concerned, yes, people are coming, but still the penetration of the Indian people in the market is still low compared to rest of the world. And that's why government want to capitalize the growth of the capital market.
Sure. Thank you, Agarwalji. Next question is from Projit today. he made a statement. As an investor myself, I'm slightly concerned about the rapid growth. Projit says, as an investor myself, I'm slightly concerned about the rapid growth that we have seen in the past year or two, specifically in the mid and small cap, which in turn has inflated the valuations of the companies. Do you see the growth as justified, or this is another bubble? I would like to know. Suodeep, do you mind taking this question?
Sure. I think there are multiple questions around this whole thing that, what do you think or FIIs are doing and all this. Okay, let me put it in the market perspective. A lot of the stocks that you see which have run up significantly over the past, let's say, 1.5 years, the kind of valuation that they are at, of course, the fundamentals don't justify that, right? That's very clear. I think that is like well understood. I think the bigger question is, and as student of finance and in an esteemed place like I am, I think you should ask the question: the kind of market caps that some of these companies are kind of having currently, and if you do a reverse valuation, what is the, let's say, for example, if there is a shipbuilding company and they make aircraft carriers, what are the number of aircraft carriers the current market cap is kind of factoring in? I'm not going to name the shipbuilding company or whatever it is, but I'm going to tell you that that particular company in the market cap, it would be around 9 to 13 aircraft carriers would be made, right, over the next, let's say, couple of decades. Just for perspective, we have 2 aircraft carriers. China has 2 plus 1, which is under construction. And US, after so many decades, has 11. So that is the kind of valuations we are dealing with. And this is just one part of it. And then you start moving into the small caps and the micro caps and the mid caps. It's, I think, completely a mess in some sense. At some point in time, as again, students, you should be asking the question, what does 100 PE mean? Because a lot of these companies would be at that kind of valuation. Do you get the earnings for the kind of valuations that you see, right? And hence, always ask the question that, does it make sense? Having said that, the question comes in is that why do retail investors invest? Because retail investors have been seeing over the past 3 years superlative returns. A lot of the investors who have come into the market, and especially the retail, I'm talking about the retail investors who have come in the market post-COVID, haven't seen cycles. It has been a one-way street. So it can go 2 ways from here. There can be a correction, which is in prices, or it could be a correction in terms of time, right? Now, how do you react to a time correction, which let's say goes on for 3 years or 2 years, right? And there are multiple, instances we have seen in India and other countries, right? So if that is the case, what do you do with returns, let's say in low single digit for the next 3 years compared to a 30-40% return that you would probably made over the past 2-3 years, right? I think that would be the test, that whether the retail investors are actually long-term investors or not. Or is it like make quick money and figure out what to do with that money, right? So that also will ask the question that, how much of penetration can happen in the Indian equity market, especially from the retail investors' perspective. FIIs and all are very, very sophisticated investors. They are not swayed by all these narratives and sectors which will be the new age and future. They have seen it across multiple countries. They know how they end. They know what kind of valuations and what kind of earnings and what kind of profit margins most of these companies make. None of the companies can be compared to what Indian markets are at. So I have my doubts in terms of where they are and whether these make any sense. So I don't think these are levels or valuations at which one would be comfortable.
So,
Yes,
if I may add to this.
Sure. Please go ahead.
So when you look at the markets and things that Sudeep said, so there was this economist called John Maynard Keynes. I'm sure everybody's heard of him. He said, markets can remain irrational longer than you can remain solvent, right? So that is something that we need to keep at the back of our minds. But let me just give you one perspective. It's not completely mad caps that people just rush in to put money and in 3-4 years. There is some bit of logic or rationale, which is whenever GDP growth surprises on the upside, okay, when your say estimates start to move up, inch up in a cycle, it is the small and mid caps which have a bigger catch up to do, and it is their earnings that rise faster than the large caps. So initially, when the rally begins, there is this thing that manifests in earnings numbers, and also the catch up is way bigger for the mid caps and small caps, and that is one of the reasons why the rally initially began. Second, then, is the flows part. We've seen the composition of flows in the market really change. And from being completely or a largely FII dependent market, we've seen a lot of flows from the retail side, and this happened post the pandemic. And a lot of domestic money, and this is something that we in the markets for the last, say, 20 years have been writing about or making presentations. And this was the dream scenario that all of us envisaged, and multiple reports that we wrote in the 2004 to 2008 era. I mean, also trying to estimate what kind of flows, and that day has really come. Having said that, I think clearly the market is, or multiple segments are in a bubble space, as Shobhadeep talked about, whether it is individual companies or sectors. But we've also seen that even in the large caps, or even in the say consumer space, before this rally began, multiple names have been at 70, 80 or 100 P for way longer, right? Consumer segment. Or if you look at the Magnificent Seven in the US, I mean, NVIDIA and the whole AI thing is not necessarily a manifestation of hard earnings numbers, but also what people are juxtaposing in terms of the future outlook, or also a reflection of some of these things. So I think when you look at valuations, when you look at these up moves, please remember to look at all of these things in conjunction, and not just really quickly arrive at a judgment that this is because of just flows or this is only because of ABC. I mean, there could be a multiple factors, and there is also a grain of fundamental truth. Like I said, the mid caps and small caps really start moving up in cycles whenever the GDP surprises begin to happen. Probably now, the GDP surprises may not be there as we go forward. I mean, globally, if you look at the growth indices, multiple say FIIs or banks have those indices. All of these are beginning to keel over or have flattened out. I think there are going to be no upward positive surprises of the types that we've seen over the last 2 years, especially for India. And therefore, you need to be looking at the whole thing in conjunction of this.
If I may add one point.
Sorry.
Oh,
Sorry.
Go ahead, Subodhi. Go ahead. I'll add after you.
No, I'm just going to one sentence. Since Sachi talked about the flows, and he made that point, interesting point about flows and all that. I think flows do not really matter because somebody is buying and somebody is selling. What matters is the expectation. To that extent, I think Sachi rightly pointed out that if GDP is increasing and these small cap, mid cap companies are seeing that earnings come in, that is the expectation that keep on increasing. And important to remember that not all expectations are rational always. Like there are sometimes irrational expectations also.
Sure. Yes.
Yeah, so I just want to. I mean, I'm absolutely not an expert like Subodhi. He's in the equity space, and of course, Sachidanand has his own sort of expertise. The only point which I would like to make as an economist is that as an investor, we also have to decide the time frame for which we are investing in. I do understand there are valuation concerns, etc. There might not be any more surprises. We can see a time correction. It might be for 2 years, 3 years. But if you think about it, and if you were a long-term investor there are multifold reasons to be optimistic about the Indian equity space. And I'll just give one single statistics. All of us, whichever estimates you go by, the Indian economy is expected to double in size in a matter of 5 years. If you use a simple metric, market cap to GDP, the market cap has to rise. In what time period it gets done, it remains a very difficult question to answer. But when you're looking at the valuation, I think we also need to keep in our mind what is the time frame for which, as an investor, we are investing in. If it's for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, then probably these concerns might not be a big concern. But if you are invested for a shorter term, then probably these issues will acquire far more importance. So that's the only point which I would like to make. Given that all of us are extremely optimistic about Indian economy, probably that's another lens via which we should look at these equity market valuations.
Right. I also had one more quick view for that. Anand made a very interesting point, and he referred about thing while we spoke about Nvidia. I think this is also a time when we are talking about doubling our economy, trying to become a third largest economy, $10 billion economy. I think we should also have a roadmap for making companies like this. When we take a roadmap of 2057, we have the roadmap of making a company like Nvidia. There is Nvidia is the article that I wrote recently. Like that piece is because the largest company of India is 20 lakh crore, and Nvidia is $3 trillion. Right? It's almost the 75% of India's economy. I think we should also have those plans. But we should this I think this is a very interesting question. I mean, at one side, despite healthy corporate and bank relationships and public investment support, PLI schemes are also very high. But the question is, where is why the private investments are not stepping up?
Okay, so the question is on why private investment is not picking up. Okay, yeah. So I think before we get into that, you mentioned it earlier. At this particular point in time, the groundwork for a pickup in private investment has been well laid out. They are highly deleveraged. The banking sector is in a healthy state. The outlook on Indian economy is extremely good. But as a private sector, probably what is the most important factor when it comes to any investment decision, because capex decisions are for a medium term, and the most important factor which probably goes there is the visibility on aggregate demand. That is the demand which is made by consumers like us. And we all are well aware that over last year and a half, while GDP has grown at 8%, consumption growth, household consumption growth has grown at just half that pace, like just at 4%. That really is a big concern, because in case of India, household demand constitutes almost 57-58% of the overall GDP. Now, if I am a private sector, there is no, with such low growth rates in household consumption, it's very difficult to go and put in money. So what is the missing piece here? Obviously, here the sore point has been on rural demand, and hopefully with monsoon, if monsoons are okay. I mean, right now signs are pretty mixed as far as monsoon performance is concerned. It's not doing as well as it started doing at the beginning of the month of July. But if monsoons are perform a little better for this year, then our sense is that rural demand will come back, because as I mentioned in my earlier comments, 45% of India's labor force is dependent on agriculture. And imagine the kind of pressure it can put on purchasing power, because 45% of the income is directly related to what's happening on the agricultural front, which in turn is dependent on monsoon and weather disruptions. India has seen 3 bad crops in succession, 3 bad crops, and that's not a joke for agricultural sector or people who are dependent on agricultural sector, because this segment of population is primarily at lower income level. So can monsoon revival really bring back private investment? I think so. That clearly remains a possibility. The other aspect which probably we will have to watch out is how to make this whole aggregate demand or household demand weather-proof. The finance minister spoke a lot about developing or investing in agricultural research. Allocations to that extent were limited. That was more in the form of, like giving a guide, like a guideline or laying out a framework or a policy, a policy guide path. But probably we'll have to see a more active public-private partnership in order to make agricultural sector weather-proof. Because as we also discussed earlier, when we're talking about skilling or moving labor away from agriculture to the manufacturing or services sector, these takes generation. They don't happen even in 3 or 4 years. So to that extent, investment in agriculture will be important so that the private sector remains more, more positive about the demand outlook. The third part, which is a key monitorable for all of us, that was not, that was mentioned in the budget, but it probably was emphasized much more strongly by the Department of Economic Affairs Secretary, that the government is working on a framework to incentivize private sector investment. That work is still, they're trying to incentivize private sector investment, or creating a financing framework to attract private sector investment. Now, how that framework plays out will be a very, very interesting thing to watch on, because I think this government has made it amply clear that capex at 3.4% of GDP, central government capex at 3.4% of GDP, is the maximum which the government can put in. From here onwards, they will have to scale it down, because there is also a need for fiscal consolidation. But the baton has to be passed on to the private sector and the state governments. And to that extent, coming back to your question on why is private sector not coming back? Demand is one aspect of it, but the other is, can the government really create the enabling environment, that is, make the whole process of doing business easier? And secondly, can they make the financing part far more feasible for the private sector? So those are the things which you'll have to watch out for. But yeah, unless demand comes back on a firmer footing, I think any kind of incentive will have limited impact as far as bringing back private sector investment is concerned.
Sure. Okay, so then you quickly add. I have another question.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Just
add
wanted to
yes.
quickly add to what Anubhuti said. In this open economy framework, right? There is also this global environment.
Right.
What I mean is, there is the ability to invest. So you refer to the twin balance sheet improvement and all of that, but there is also this question of willingness. And if you have the mother of all capacities sitting out of China, whether it is the metals and commodities, or even rare earths, something pertaining to the future, you would not really want to invest big time. So if you're an entrepreneur and a corporate, and so much capacity sitting out of China, and they will more likely dump given the kind of economic rut they are in, you would think before you jump to investing. Second, we are going through global mega shifts. I mean, global trends like decarbonization. With Europe really coming out with a carbon tax, and many other governments will come up with their own versions of carbon tax, there is a lot of regulatory uncertainty. Again, that will prevent people from investing big time in the erstwhile, say, large capacities. I mean, typically they've been the commodity players, metals and stuff like that. People would still want to hold and look at clarity. So the willingness, apart from whatever Anubhuti said about the domestic economy, demand and all that, I think from a global perspective, that is also that something that needs to be kept in mind. Back to you.
Sure. I wanted to shoot the next question to President, sir, but I think he just left. Maybe his time was up, specifically on the other parts. But nonetheless, let me move ahead. Let me see whether Sodeep, if you can try and attempt this question, which a student called Milind has, which I ideally wanted to ask Mr. Agrawal. He's asking about the SGB, sovereign gold bond. I think that's a very interesting question, which not a lot of people have covered. The question is, the recent reduction in the customs duty on gold as announced in this year's budget, given that this change is expected to affect the returns of 2016-17 sovereign gold bonds due to redemption in August, do you think this might discourage people from investing in SGBs?
So I think the SGBs were introduced in the first place, if I come from the government side, that the physical holding of gold, or that urge to kind of hold on to gold reduces, and there is a certain return that you get on the gold. So it was never about, that in a particular tax regime change, how much investment am I getting, and whether I can get impacted. If you have a need for the gold, you kind of invest in SGBs and you get a certain return on that, and you kind of build your portfolio on that basis. So see, tax changes will continue. I mean, it's not a certainty, right? If you have a certain financial portfolio needs to have that gold aspect in your in the whole portfolio allocation, you will hold on to it, right? Or you will buy it. I don't think the tax regime particularly changes. It's similar to having an LTCG, right? I mean, LTCG increasing from 10% to 12.5%. But if you want to get exposure to, let's say, equities or real estate, you will end up having that, right? But you may choose not to invest in sovereign gold bond because simply you don't want to buy gold in the future. So then you don't need that sovereign gold bond. But if you do need to buy gold in the future, maybe this is one of the better options rather than, kind of keeping it in fixed deposit or something of that sort and buying later and having a price impact. So I think it depends on how you look at it from an investment perspective, because it's purely a financial asset at the end of the day.
Okay, sure. Thanks for giving that answer, Sodeep. I want Sachidanand, you take this question. This is slightly related to manufacturing. I'm unable to read the name of the student here, but the question is: as the manufacturing sector related jobs are becoming less preferred in the young generation, companies are facing shortage of employees there. What steps and strategies are the private sector companies looking into to attract the young generation? Do we see integration of AI and some level of automation into manufacturing as one of the probable solution to this? Obviously, AI, ChatGPT, and all this Gen AI are the new things, but I think the students wants to know basically what kind of vibes the manufacturing company should create to attract the new generation.
So absolutely true. This is something that we've experienced firsthand, and I alluded to the statement from our chairman. We've been facing these shortages, and we employ almost as much as the US government employs US Army people, right? I mean, roughly 4.5 lakh people. And there is a demand for all kinds of skills, at least in our sphere of work, right? So we've got IT, we've got BFSI, we've got infrastructure and things like that. So we do need people in the cutting edge, the Gen AI and all of that, semiconductors and stuff like that. So we are present in almost all spheres. And therefore, there is a huge demand for skilled, trained, and experienced people. At the same time, I just wanted to talk about a little dichotomy that I think educational institutions and the youngsters need to be aware of. So far, the policy push has been predominantly towards services. So you look at the LPG reforms 1991 onwards, the financial sector has been in the spotlight, right? So we went for the very glamorized glamorized part of the economy, and a lot of activity happened in those white collar jobs. Therefore, right, there has been a big pivot, not just from government of India. I also mentioned the US, the erstwhile, say, champions of global free trade and capitalism and all of that. They are championing the world's biggest move towards muscular industrial policy. And when governments go big on industrial policy, there is going to be a shift in the nature of jobs that are going to be demanded, right? So essentially, the point I'm making is there is going to be a big demand coming for blue collar jobs as well. And then which is what these job shortages look like. So if one is a plumber or an electrician, or you have the ability to do things with your own hands, I think you are in a better position to find a job which pays you well and probably helps you move ahead in your career. I mean, our say job market or the educational institutions. So from the supply side, the supply has been geared for too long to cater to the white collar segments of the economy. A lot of services, BFSI. So look at the previous cycle, 2000 2008. I mean the heydays. the bulk of the jobs came from IT, BFSI, and telecom, right? Those were the big job creators that were there. And now you look at the last 10, 15 years, they have stopped creating as many jobs. And there has been this capital deepening. I don't want to bore you with technical things, but essentially, uh, putting in more capital versus using more labor. I mean, that's what has happened in this economy. But I think we should all be using this simple logic. Follow the money, right? If governments of the day are spending big dollars in manufacturing, that's where the big jobs are going to be coming from. So I think the economy, the supply side, the educational institutions need to be there for imparting skills, value add towards the jobs of the future. These could be the Gen AI, semiconductors, renewables, stuff like that, which are the industries of tomorrow, the EVs, and also at the same time, the big infrastructure push, the big say manufacturing push will lead to a lot of jobs which are just going up begging. I mean, we just cannot get people, and this is not a story of this year, but even last year or the year before that, we really struggled to get thousands of people, and the salaries or the working conditions are probably the best, and yet we struggle to find people. So I think there is this pivot that needs to be made on the supply side as well.
Certainly. In fact, I think upgrading and shaping and strengthening the ITIs, I think, was one of the important aspects of the budget, which the finance minister said. Because even in forget even rural, but even in urban, forget urban, but even in rural areas, finding plumber and electrician has become a big problem. And one of the bold statement, which the Chris Wood, the equity head of the Jeffries, made a comment when he was in India just 2 weeks back, is this that you know plumber is more important than a programmer today. That's the statement that he made, which was quite bold. So I will take one
He
question.
probably spoke to somebody from L&T before.
But I can vouch for his statement when it if you speak to a lot of people, especially say in London, they'll vouch for that. This is a fact. It's very, very difficult to find anyone to do basic jobs as simple as plumber. So I think just one point which I would like to add here is there's a narrative change which also needs to happen at school levels. There is a lot more emphasis on what Sachidanand mentioned towards degree led education which finally earns you a degree. Vocational training is still looked down upon in India, and that narrative has to change if the demand from the manufacturing sector over the next few years has to be finally met. So I think that narrative change also has to happen over the next few years, along with the push towards building the right kind of skill sets.
Anubhuti, in fact, I wanted to shoot this question to you only on the similar part, which is asked by Aditya, but I think he has given a thumbs up by 3 others. It means that 4 students wants to ask. Is specifically, given the skills gap, as many of the panelists have mentioned, wouldn't it be prudent on a long-term perspective to increase spending on education and upskilling of employees instead of transferring monetary incentives to the corporates on hiring? I'm asking this because we spend about 3% of GDP on education versus 6% of major countries. Anubhuti, you want to add on?
Sorry, 6% on?
On basically the government spends 3% on education, and where the other countries spend 6% on the education is the difference that the the student is actually telling us. But his point is, shouldn't the government spend more on the education and not giving an incentive to the corporate?
Okay, so rather than incentivizing corporates to train, shouldn't the government spend directly? Is that the question?
Yes, yes.
So look, it has to be a mix of it. I think when it comes to basic education, when it comes to upgrading the ITIs, I would agree with the student's point that the government really has to increase its spending. So when we spoke about this employment linked or ELIs, which the government has launched in this particular budget, bulk of it is in the form of incentives. So only a small proportion is in the form of allocation which has been put aside for upgrading the industrial training institute. So I think over a period of time, they will try to allocate more towards upgrading the skill level. So yes, I would agree that probably the mix has to be almost 50-50 rather than say 80-20 in terms of incentivizing private sector vis-a-vis upgrading the skilling institute. So yes, government should definitely increase its spending on education and as well as skilling, not merely putting more money aside for education. I think skilling becomes far more important. So they have just started, but hopefully we'll find the right balance going forward.
Okay. Sure,
Amol, just one point on
Okay.
that one, just
Quickly,
to
yes.
yeah, just there was the Skill India mission, right? So it's
Yes.
not as if the government did not try skilling.
Yeah.
There are a couple of issues that comes up when they try to kind of make it at a grand scale, at a pan India level run by the government, because ultimately on the ground there are hits and misses that happen. So spending money and having more misses is not what the government wants to probably do in this kind of a budget. Also, the second part is spending more on education. You have to remember that it's a federal country. There is a concurrent list where center and state share certain sectors in terms of spending, in terms of policy, etc. So it's not just the central government who can direct that this is the number of schools or colleges, etc., that have to be made. It's also the states who have to spend. And of course, every state has a different spending agenda and everything. And obviously, the employment problem does not immediately get solved just by increasing allocation to education. It's a it's a generational spending that has to be done.
Okay. Thanks, Prodip, for adding that. I think time is up. We have taken, I think, questions. There are maybe 3-4 questions left, but students, we actually discussed these questions, in our conversation. So even if you look at this, actually get answers to, the 1 or 2 questions I didn't take. I found that's slightly irrelevant to our topic. But I think I have tried my best to take all the questions. It was nice to listen to you, Anubhuti, Sachidananji, Sodipji, and the president and learn a lot from you. In fact, I had more questions to you. In fact, on deepening the stock market, improving the sovereign bonds, and move towards with fiscal and the. I think students had a lot of interest on employment and specifically investment, so we focused on that. It was a great pleasure to listen to all of you. And thank you so much, and Strong, for inviting me and moderating this. Thank you so much. Lastly, stay tuned to Economic Times and specifically, we keep doing lots of activities specifically on the financial and economic side. If you have any thoughts of research or something, internship, please feel free. We'll stop here. Back to the team of Niveshak.
Thank you, sir. So thank you everyone for your time. Team Niveshak wants to extend our gratitude towards all the speakers and the moderator for your valuable insight on Indian Union budget. This session was very interactive and informative, and it helped us to understand the implication of the budget. We look forward for future opportunities with all the speakers.